They told the USS Carney it was just another patrol sweep in the Strait of Hormuz, routine electronic warfare reconnaissance, nothing more. But when the sonar operator picked up that low-frequency hum vibrating through the hull plating at 2:31 in the morning, he knew this wasn't going to be routine at all. What happened next turned into the most complex multi-domain engagement the Navy has fought in decades, and the scariest part? It was all a test. The Al-Sadir looked like every other oil tanker moving through those waters. 150,000 tons, neutral flag, sitting in international shipping lanes where it's legally untouchable. But when the Mark 6 patrol boats closed to within 200 yards, concealed shutters slid back along the railings and 12.7mm machine guns opened fire. The civilian bridge had just revealed itself as a weapons platform, and the boarding team that fought their way inside found something that should terrify anyone who understands what's really happening in the Gulf. Below the waterline, dozens of pressurized steel cylinders were magnetically clamped to the exterior plating like parasites. These weren't cargo containers or smuggled weapons. They were autonomous underwater explosives, each one designed to track the acoustic signature of a surface vessel and detonate on contact. When those magnetic clamps released in synchronized sequence and 20 distinct signatures emerged from beneath the tanker, the Carney was suddenly fighting for its life against enemies that were hunting it from below the surface. But the underwater swarm was just the opening move. While 3 Mark 54 torpedoes were detonating the parasite pods, 50 Iranian fast attack craft screamed out from the coastal haze at 50 miles per hour. Fiberglass hulls armed with unguided rockets, using the massive bulk of the tanker to block the destroyer's line of sight. The Mark 45 gun was disintegrating boats every 3 seconds, but they kept coming in a formation designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume. The logic behind this attack is brutally simple, and it's why Iran thinks they can win a war against the United States Navy. They can't match American ships in tonnage or technology, so they don't try. Instead, they flood the zone with cheap, fast, expendable platforms. If you can force the US to fire a $2 million missile at a $50,000 drone, and you can do that 50 times in a row, you win the economic war even if you lose every tactical engagement. The Al-Sadir was the perfect Trojan horse for this strategy because it was sitting in international waters where any miscalculation could result in a diplomatic disaster. Now here's where the Iranians made their first critical mistake. To make their surface swarm work, they needed air cover, so they used an A-10C Warthog as bait. The Gibbs 300 radar at Bandar Abbas locked onto what looked like a fat, slow-moving target, and Iranian 14 Tomcats launched to intercept. But 4 miles above them, 2 F-35 Lightning stealth fighters had been holding a silent orbit for 41 minutes, recording every frequency and pulse the Iranian systems used to maintain their locks. When the lead Tomcat fired an A-54 Phoenix missile at the Warthog, the F-35s activated their jamming systems and twisted the Iranian radar pulse before firing it back. Suddenly, the pilot saw 10 different targets on his screen, then his radar went completely black. The 1,000-pound missile that was supposed to turn the A-10 into debris lost its lock and hit the water 5 miles short. Before he could even process what happened, an AIM-120D left the internal bay of the F-35 at Mach 4. The proximity fuse triggered 30 feet from his wing and turned the Tomcat into a fireball. Back on the tanker, the boarding team watched massive steel deck plates slide back to reveal a swarm of Shahed drones spooling up for launch. These are the same drones devastating Ukrainian cities, but they were aimed at the USS Carney. The ship's 5-inch gun fired a proximity fuse shell that detonated right over the drone rack, shredding the carbon fiber wings before they could even launch. But the Iranians had one more layer to their attack, and this is where it almost worked. 6 suicide boats loaded with hundreds of pounds of explosives began their final run at the Carney's midsection. The gunners stopped 5 of them, but the 6th was closing at 50 miles per hour with less than 100 yards to go. The Phalanx close-in weapon system took over, firing tungsten rounds at 75 per second. The explosion happened so close that the shockwave shattered the bridge windows and showered the deck in burning fiberglass. Then came 3 Gator cruise missiles, heavy hitters designed to sink capital ships, flying low to stay under radar. The forward missile cells were empty, so the ship had to rely on the Phalanx again. The 3rd missile performed a pop-up maneuver, climbing high before diving straight down at the bridge. The explosion happened only 100 yards above the hull, and the heat was so intense it blistered paint on the superstructure. But the USS Carney was still standing, and that's when the remaining Iranian boats realized the fight was over and ran for the coast. Here's what makes this engagement strategically terrifying beyond the tactical details. This was a live fire test of American defensive systems, and both sides collected massive amounts of intelligence. The Iranians now know exactly how long it takes US ships to respond to multi-domain saturation attacks. They recorded response times, tactical decisions, and defensive capabilities, but the Americans recorded them too. The data from the F-35s gave the Carrier Strike Group a complete electronic map of Iranian coastal defenses, including radar locations, missile types, and response protocols that will feed targeting algorithms the next time this happens. The Iranians revealed a doctrinal shift that changes the rules of naval warfare. They're weaponizing civilian infrastructure, turning commercial tankers into launch platforms, and embedding military assets inside neutral shipping traffic. That means you can't tell the difference between a civilian vessel and a weapons platform until it's already inside your defensive perimeter. The first shot becomes the last warning, and the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. Consider how close this came to disaster. If the Iranians had launched their swarm 60 seconds earlier while the Carney's sonar was still processing the underwater threats, the outcome could have been catastrophic. If one suicide boat had gotten 50 yards closer before the phalanx engaged, the explosion would have been inside the ship's defensive envelope. If that cruise missile had performed its pop-up maneuver 3 seconds later, the defensive systems wouldn't have had the geometry to intercept it. But here's the detail that reveals the true scope of Iranian planning. When the boarding team opened the first parasite pod with robotic cutters, they didn't find drone parts or conventional explosives. They found high-resolution digital maps with exact GPS coordinates and structural weak points of every major desalination plant in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. This wasn't just an attack on a Navy destroyer. This was reconnaissance for strikes against water supplies that serve millions of people. The Shadow War was actually preparation for a humanitarian disaster. The side that won this engagement didn't prevail because of overwhelming firepower or superior equipment. They won because they maintained situational awareness across 3 domains simultaneously, processed threats faster, and saw the attack pattern before it fully developed. That's not a hardware advantage that can be purchased or reverse engineered. That's a doctrinal advantage built on training, experience, and institutional knowledge that takes decades to develop properly. But the enemy is rational and competent. They watched how America fought today, recorded the defensive responses, and they will adjust their tactics accordingly. The next test will account for what they learned about US capabilities, and it will probe different weaknesses with different combinations of threats. The Shadow War in the Strait of Hormuz isn't over because one engagement ended successfully. It's escalating because both sides now know exactly what the other is capable of, and 30% of global oil shipments still flow through those same contested waters every single day. The USS Carney turned toward open water, towing the captured tanker behind it, but the real victory wasn't stopping one attack. It was proving that when enemies try to overwhelm American defenses with chaos and volume, the side that sees everything first is the side that decides how the story ends. And right now, every radar signature and electronic frequency along that Iranian coastline is being watched by systems that never blink and never forget.